Hi, this is Pete from Euro-Versy. In this week's Twitter space, we talk about fandom and what it is to be a fan of the Eurovision Song Contest. The discussion went on for over 2 hours, so we've broken it up into two 50-minute parts, which we've edited it down. We hope you enjoy this first part, and the second part will be out soon.
So what we thought we'd talk about this week is fandom, and we talked through in the tweets about some of the examples of things we wanted to talk about. So things such as, are there different types of fans? Is there snobbery amongst fans? Is there elitism amongst fans? Do certain types of fans act in an entitled manner? Should fans get access to things such as press spaces, or should they be prioritised for tickets? Even as far as, should fans have a say in the running of the contest and the selection of national finals? First of all, let's start in a nice way, I suppose. What are the positives of being a Eurovision fan? I know that's an incredibly broad question, but let's throw it out from there.
Pete, why don't you start with your positives?
I think that my positives of being a fan are that locally I've been sort of welcomed and accepted into the fold when I became a more sociable fan. For me, being a Eurovision fan for a very long time was about doing this as a solo exercise, occasionally interacting with people online, and very rarely did I get involved in sort of public things. And I've met people for various sort of anxieties and things, and I found that people have been welcoming. When I went to Lisbon for the contest, I found that the people I bumped into in the Euro Village were willing to chat. Those were the sort of the positives, I think, for me as being a fan. Online, I think there is the possibility of constructive discussion about various things, and we've proved that in the last 2 weeks, I think, when we've had these discussion groups, and that by and large we all by and large want the same thing, which is to enjoy a Saturday night in May.
So Lisbon, though, that wasn't very long ago, and I know you've been a fan for a very, very long time. Can you remember what drew you to the fandom initially, even when it was just a private affair?
How do you mean? Sorry.
Well, you got there somehow. And you've talked about kind of engaging with a public space, but that's only the last couple of years. So when it was just you at home with your scorecard, kind of what was it there that you found that was so positive that you kept going back to it?
Well, that was the contest itself, and the enjoyment of the contest. We've all got different reasons why we enjoy it, but I've been a fan since about 2001, I think. And the short story was that I went on Napster to sort of illegally download a couple of songs that I'd heard, and then I started obsessively collecting from there. And next thing you know, I had a hard drive full of old Eurovision MP3s, and my dad had to sit me down to say I found something on the computer, and he was more concerned that it was Eurovision and not pornography. And I sort of kept that sort of fandom to myself. Once I got into sort of sixth form or university, I talked about it a bit more, but even then there was a sort of negativity towards it from other people.
It's interesting that we started off thinking about positives, and obviously that was a deliberate move, but it's been shrouded by negativity, like you just said there, that from outsiders, you've had a predominantly negative response. And I think a lot of people would agree with that as well, that when we start talking about being fans, we're met with a lot of stereotypes often.
And I think just something to add to that as well. What I've noticed, I think there's quite a large difference in attitudes in terms of age and generation. So earlier this year, I worked with people who had like an average age of like 25, and there was no po-faced or snobbery towards it at all. They genuinely loved it, or they're like, "Oh my god, you got Eurovision, that's amazing! Oh my god!" Whereas it was a much more of a mixed, more disgruntled kind of response. If you speak to people above X age, it's like, "Oh, do you like that?" Do you know what I mean? So, but I think Sam Ryder, he's probably. I'm not saying it's going to be a magic silver bullet, but I do think there's probably quite a big. It might potentially be a big shift in attitudes, especially as the sort of the Wogan baggage effects will, as each year goes by, will gradually fade away as well.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think attitudes are changing even amongst my cohort of sort of people I went to university and schools. I'll tell you a brief story that when I was in my fourth year at university, I was sat in a hospital common room, and I had an MP3 player on, and I was listening to it was some song for Europe MP3s. A mature student came up to me and said, "Oh, what are you listening to?" And I had no shame. I just went on listening to old Eurovision songs, and he went, "F*** Pete, when are you going to come out of their closet, you?" And I'm sorry for the language, but that was the word for word verbatim of what was sort of thrown at me in a room full of people. And it was a very, it wasn't the nicest sort of thing to happen. And that was, you do get those insinuations that, oh, it's crap, oh, it's political, why'd you bother with that? Oh, it's, And even recently I had one of my bosses say to me something like, she saw that I had a Eurovision lanyard on, and she said, oh, God, but you have a wife, what are you doing watching that? But I think now I have friends who text me every May and say, yeah, actually this year's been quite good. When Liverpool got it, lots of people text me to say, I'm really pleased for you because you've been following this for so long, so I'm happy that it's coming to your town. So I think there is a shift, but it took a long time and a lot of negativity to get there.
I think one of the big things for me, I became a fan in '92. I saw Michael Ball singing One Step at a Time on Top of the Pops, and I thought, never in a million years would I buy that. But I think in the terms of the context of Eurovision, I think that could do really well. I'm going to watch it this year and see how he does. And then that was it. I was hooked. I've been a fan ever since. But I think you look at the lineup of Eurovision in 1992, it was nothing in there was reflecting the chart of the day, really. But look at Eurovision in 2022 and just look how so much of it, and look like with Maneskin and then Sam Ryder to an extent, although he hasn't had quite the same impact as Maneskin globally. Then you've got Rosalind. So much of Eurovision now feels very chart relevant compared to how when I became a fan. And I think it's going to become more and more, because I think it's one of the few shop windows for the music industry on a global scale now that's relatively accessible for labels. And I think one thing, what people are realising with Eurovision is that it's a music industry, and an industry needs to make money. And what better way to advertise a song which you can then instantly go on Spotify or iTunes and download or stream than have it on a TV show that's watched by 200 million people. It wasn't quite the same thing in 1992. If I'd wanted the Icelandic entry that year, I probably would have had to write to a nice person in Iceland and ask them to go and pop out to their version of HMV and buy me the vinyl and post it over to me, or put something on a compilation tape for me, which did happen a bit when I was in the 90s with me, with some friends I had. But I think I think technology is helping Eurovision become not the joke that it used to be. And I think we're finally getting it in the UK that actually, oh no, this is a really good window for an act that has potential.
And also, what a terrible year to get started on, Jamie.
I know. I was thinking,
and you stuck with it.
I stuck with it. But that was the year that was the first of Ireland's 3 in a row, wasn't it? So I wasn't the biggest fan of Ireland 3 years later. They were like Manchester United. They just kept winning all the time. But but go back to the fandom thing. To say you were a Eurovision fan in 1992 was like an object of derision. And I know, this has been said a few times, I think there's a big overlap in the Venn diagram of Eurovision fans and Doctor Who fans. And that was something in my childhood that I held dear, was Doctor Who, and then I ventured into Eurovision. And I think they're two cultural phenomenon that in recent years have become something that's not something to be pointed and laughed at for liking. And I think it's great the way that's developed in recent years. And so I think being a Eurovision fan isn't quite what it was. And I've changed jobs in the past 4 years, and I work with a much younger demographic of people now. People in like their mid-20s compared to people who are in their 40s, 50s. And I don't hear any negativity about it from people I work with. They're genuinely interested in it. They genuinely like some of the stuff. I've heard people trying to get tickets to Måneskin gigs and things like that who I work with. So I think it's genuinely something. I think it's what they always wanted Eurovision to be from the off. It's maybe what it's finally becoming. Nearly 70 years after it was created, it took its time, but I think it's finally become the thing it was intended to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as a follow-up to that, then, why do you think it went so badly wrong in the first 69 years?
I don't think it did. I just think sometimes it's right thing, right time. In the 70s, Eurovision was still a thing. All the big songwriters were into, wasn't it? The 60s and 70s tailed off a bit in the 80s. Excuse me. We had a bit of renaissance in the 90s, and I think only really maybe the UK didn't quite pick up the ball in the 21st century. Other countries saw the potential and ran with it. But so, I appreciate I'm not really talking about fandom here, but I think it's when it becomes something it's not an embarrassment to admit to liking. That's when I think it starts becoming embraced by more than the bubble that needs to be embraced in it. It needs to go beyond the bubble. And I think Eurovision is now going beyond the bubble, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think part of the, again, this is opinion rather than sort of rooted in any stuff. I think part of the problem, particularly in Britain, was that Eurovision started life as a light entertainment program rather than a musical program. I would say, in terms of who we were sending, Polkar, Teddy Johnson, Brian Johnson, etc., and that the light entertainment department at the BBC ran it for a very long time, and it didn't go over to Radio 1 or Radio 2, or it didn't go over to BBC Radio for a very long time. And I don't know if it just, as the 60s progressed, that young fans watched this archaic programme with sort of bow ties and dresses and orchestras, and it just didn't keep pace with what was going on. And I think now, as you've said, I think it's perhaps one of the reasons why younger people who aren't necessarily fans but do enjoy it, sort of do enjoy it.
Simeon, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think one of the
He's so polite.
One of the interesting changes.
I say this every week. Don't stick your hand up, and he's so nice.
Sorry. I think one of the interesting changes is that it has become, maybe you have to seek it out a bit more now, right? It used to be something that was on the one of 4 channels that people had access to in their homes, and therefore a lot more people were maybe forced to watch it, not enjoy it, and forced to have a negative kind of view of it. And now you kind of have to actively seek it out a bit more. It's competing with Netflix, with Amazon Prime, with all kinds of different forms of entertainment. And therefore, to be an active participant of it, it's an event. You throw a party. Everyone has to get together to watch a bit of live TV. I mean, like, I don't watch any live TV apart from the news and Eurovision and maybe a bit of sport. Do you know what I mean? It's like that's an interesting factor in it, I think, in what's changed.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting point to raise, because obviously I have a very different relationship from Eurovision growing up in Scandinavia. Melodifestivalen in Sweden is on weekly after Christmas, and people watch it as a family. There's less people watching Eurovision to the same extent, but I think just engaging with the kind of Swedish selection sets you up for a different frame of mind, and kind of what does it involve to be a fan of this, to enjoy it and to speak openly about it.
I remember meeting you a very, very long time ago and finding out you're from Sweden, and instantly wanting to sort of steer a conversation towards the Melody Fest, because it's like, they must take it more seriously. There's someone I can speak to. But again, I mean, younger sort of people now, I think Scotty said it just then, that I had a student with me recently who saw the Lanyard, and again, it was just a sort of, oh my God, you're a fan of that, and oh my God, you've been to it, and things, and there's a lot more of that now than there was the previous sort of derision.
I say that I wonder how much that has to do with the kind of the micro demographic as well, not just thinking about age, but what your cultural background is, because it's great to hear that in your experience, young people, and I'm going to assume we're thinking about the 18 to 26 demographic here, are engaging with it in a different way. In my experience, that same demographic is still kind of, oh, what we have to engage with this somehow, you're going to give us a lecture on it, what's that about? So I'm wondering if that kind of cultural setting of what is authentic entertainment, what is authentic music, plays a part still, at least in a UK setting.
And anyone who's trapped in theatre with me gets a lecture on it, so it's mandatory for the course.
Yeah, but I have cool slides.
I mean, I have a similar experience to Veronica in that, I teach popular music songwriting, and we have a task where you have to write a Eurovision song. And it's surprising the amount of popular music students who are from all around the world haven't ever watched it. It is still like not that well known in some weird way amongst people who are actively songwriters and want to work in the music industry. I agree that the attitudes have changed and become way more positive, but I also think there is still like an undercurrent of like avoidance or being too cool for it in some way, maybe.
Yeah. So we talked about how we sort of interact with non-fans and how non-fan attitudes might have changed. I wanted to talk how fans interact with one another. First of all, I mean, how do we define what a fan is? I'm sure we've all got our own individual definitions of what you regard as a fan. What do you think? I suppose the question I'm asking is, what level of commitment to it do you see in someone before you think, oh yeah, they're a true fan, or what have you? Or does such a point really matter?
You'll turn down social invitations in Saturday nights in January and February because you have to see a certain semi-final in a certain country for their national final, something like that. I'd say that's like the definition of a Eurovision fan. The first 3 months of the year are pretty much boxed off for you because you're following various comings and goings in the national final season.
Something as well that's slightly, like, in terms of quantifying what makes a fan, I mean, it's obviously purely subjective.
Yeah.
But this, I might be jumping a little bit ahead in terms of things that might be deemed as problematic with the fandom sometimes. But I know there seems to be a thing at the moment in how the authenticity of being a fan. So I think, for example, if you're a fan of San Remo, which for what it's worth, I'm not particularly, but by not being a fan of San Remo, sometimes people might think you're a bit like, I don't know, a basic bitch or something because it's not your thing. Do you know what I mean? I just realised it's sort of like Vanessa with San Remo, and I'm like, yeah, it's nice, but I don't really get it. I don't know. It just feels like, in particular, like the entry completely escapes for this year with Blanco and Mahmood.
Brividi.
Yeah, just personal preference. It just left me cold, and people were like thinking it was like the second coming. I'm like, I don't understand. Is it if this was sang in a different language, would you really be having the same reactions to it? I just don't believe much of the fandom would be, and it was hailed as a potential winner. So that's something that just slightly irked me a bit with the fandom, and that kind of plays into what your question was about measuring or quantifying how much of a fan is, depending on what national finals you watch and how many you watch, etc., etc. I think it's just what floats your boat. But I think if you do find a national final where that past country has sent songs you really like, so I randomly like the Slovenian national final because they often send the completely random, and they'll never send what they should send most of the time, but it's always quite an interesting watch, and you never know what you're going to get with countries like that. That's what I quite like them.
But even that in itself is a reasonably new phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, when I started in 2001, when Jamie started in 1992, the idea that you would watch the Bosnian quarter-final or whatever was just a non-starter. And it's only, again, with technology and the internet that we've sort of been able to access more of those things. And I would say that I'm not a big national final season person, just because of time and work and trying to keep track of it all more than anything. It's hats off to the people who can watch semi-final 3 of Norway Melody Grand Prix whilst watching a Lithuanian quarter-final, whilst having the French selection on 3 different devices. I don't know how anyone does it. So does that attitude make me sort of less of a fan compared to other people, I suppose?
No, I don't. I think because if you love something passionately, then you're a fan of it, and I don't think you need to, as Scott said, you don't need to quantify that passion for something. I think it's just in you, and you just love it, and it could be something that maybe you'll just make a playlist of that year's songs, and that'll be or for your commute or something like that, which is something I look forward to doing every year. I don't follow many of the national finals because I do think life is too short to deal with how many of them. And I understand where Scott's coming from. There's a certain evangelicizing of certain things. I remember a few years back when Hattery was the Icelandic entry, and it just didn't do a thing for me. But I felt like if you didn't love this song and this group, that you were somehow the worst Eurovision fan in the world ever, because they were sort of like elevated to this sort of like godlike status within fandom. Just this song because I imagine it was the look and the style and the sound was unusual for the contest, but it was the type of thing where people were writing articles about it specifically on this group and stuff, and I just personally didn't get it, and it's times like that when I think, am I really a fan? Because I'm not falling for this in the way that every other fan seems to be.
But we've seen that this year as well with Chanel. You either think Chanel is Yaz Queen who's slaying everything, or you're an old fogey that just doesn't get it. We've seen a binary sort of decision. You're either for her or against her, and I think most of us probably have no strong opinion either way. I mean, but that's a good point, Jamie, about Hatari. But has anyone experienced negativity because they've expressed I just don't get it sort of opinion?
Yeah, I'm going to show my age here a little bit, but I remember back in 1999 in the run-up to the contest in Jerusalem, so very much the early days of the fandom, so no Twitter, just like online fora, etc. And there was almost this huge obsessive group of fans who were convinced that Marlene from Cyprus was going to win Eurovision 99 in an absolute landslide. And anyone who dared to suggest that she wasn't was, given the sort of abuse, I guess you'd sort of see maybe people on Twitter who say today that they don't like Chanel, and I always thought it was, because it was my first exposure to sort of the online fandom, and it was just shocking. I mean, I myself didn't actually contribute because I was terrified, because all I could see was this abuse. But it's interesting how, I guess, I mean, you could say it hasn't, I suppose this kind of thing of not respecting someone's opinion isn't a Twitter development. I think when the online fandom came, so did this. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you can even look up the Internet Archives, and you'll see that it was just this fanatical group of fans who somehow believed that Cyprus was going to win '99 in a landslide, and if you didn't, then you should be ostracized.
And I remember the same when Nettie won for Israel. I remember gold medals being hung around her neck months before the contest started. If you said, I'm just not seeing this, it's just a woman doing a chicken dance, I don't get this, you were there was a certain amount of negativity and a certain amount of, I don't want to say abuse, but there was a sort of, well, you just don't get it.
That's very similar to what happened this year as well, I found, or last year, this year, however you want to term it, regarding the Ukrainian entry. We knew it was going to win before the contest because there was lots of people voting for it for non-musical reasons, which is their prerogative. But there was I felt there was a lot of debate surrounding that and the validity of the entry, and a lot of people being scared to even voice kind of, oh, I had a different favorite, because then all of a sudden you were in favor of the invasion.
I would say that there was a lot of, I kept very quiet on the view that I didn't think Stephanie is a very good song. I certainly didn't suggest that there were other reasons why it won beyond its merit, because I thought it wasn't worth the hassle.
Yeah, and I think there were quite a few people who felt that way. I personally thought it was great, but I don't know, would I have voted for it normally? Probably, but I was certainly extra motivated.
I think one thing that was interesting about the Netta thing as well, Pete, back in 2018, was that, as you said, there was this fanatical group of fans sort of before, my God, she's going to win in a landslide. It's amazing. It's the best song ever. What's wrong with you if you don't like it? But then the second rehearsal started and Eleni came out on stage and, poked her hair a couple of times, they all abandoned Netta. I mean, the same people who a couple of weeks earlier had been talking about, Netta being the second coming, were all of a sudden saying, that it's like they forgot she existed. And then when she actually went on and won, they were the people tweeting that they couldn't understand how she won. So, I mean, I think that's basically just confirms that fans are fickle. Maybe, I don't know, but it was weird, because I remember, yes, as you said, I wasn't closely sort of on Twitter at the time, but I do remember, as you said, like fanatical fans. But I do remember that as soon as rehearsal started and Cyprus was becoming sort of more highly regarded, they dumped Netta and all switched to Eleni, and then sort of seem to be still tweeting to this day how they can't understand that Netta won, which is bizarre.
So I'm an American, so one of the things that's an issue for me when it comes to the community sometimes is when I have an opinion, because I don't get I try to understand a lot of songs that have very large cultural elements to it, especially, Ukraine for a big example in 2022. And the issue for me is when I express that I'm not a huge fan of that song, a lot of immediate defense is people say, oh, you're the American, you don't understand this. Like, I know I haven't been following the contest for, 30 some odd years, but it's one of those things where it's the assumption that because I'm not European, because I'm an American, it's difficult it invalidates my opinion regardless of what that opinion is. So, but I mean, I know that the community is incredibly gracious, incredibly inclusive, but it's just those one or two moments where I'm kind of like, is it, if you guys are yelling at me for coming, into a contest that is not an American sort of contest, especially with these last couple of winners where they've been highly controversial and highly sort of publicized widely throughout the world.
Well, with the development of an international vote next year, the international fandom is going to become more important than ever. So I think to try and shut that down would not be a good idea.
But it does, of course, open up questions of, are we going to see even more of that, of saying, well, this isn't a true winner because the American and the South American or whatever votes made it the winner, and we think this one should have won instead.
So for me, I know that there are American Eurovision fans. I know that there's probably quite a lot of them, but I don't see it discussed enough on U.S. media sites. Like when there's a winner of the Eurovision Song Contest, like the American news sites, like they pick up on it and they publish a story about it. But for 85% of the people that are in the United States, not only do they probably not know what it is, but they don't care. So I'm going to say that from the United States, I don't think there will be a huge influence. I think from other countries that are very closely tied to Eurovision that haven't been able to participate for a while or just have those sort of stronger ties, it'll be a larger like influence. But I think for the United States, it won't be as much of an influence as a lot of people potentially might say that it is.
And I think mathematically as well, the chance that I can't remember the last time anyone won by less than 12 points. So I think the international vote is going to be a nicety, but I don't think it's ever going to be crucial. So I would hope that we never get to a stage where a song that loses by 2 points or whatever is, oh, the bloody international jury calls that. I would hope that the points would have been settled by that point. When we talk about these sort of particular conflicts, so we've talked about the idea of commitment to Eurovision and whether there's any problems with that. Does anyone find that there's any problems of being a fan based on age or what generation of Eurovision they like? Sometimes we see comments, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it as well, where we say, oh, the people who think Eurovision started in 2010, for example, is a common comment I see, and I've probably made it myself at some point. And inversely, the people who think that if you like the orchestra era, then you are a dinosaur and you have no relevance. Has anyone ever experienced that sort of almost sort of age-based or era-based sort of snobbery?
I think I'm probably the oldest one here today. I'm quite old for a Eurovision fan, and I don't think it's all pervasive, but you do get the odd sort of undercurrent of ageism sometimes, that comes through. You get. I'm not a boomer quite, but you do get sort of boomer used as like occasionally as sort of like a negative, context. I've got no issue with people who are only interested in Eurovision, of the last 10 or 15 years, because they're the future, the fandom.
I was just going to say that I always feel my age every New Year's Eve during the BSC 250 countdown.
Yeah.
Because my favourites usually, if they make it at all, they're very rarely above spot 200.
My votes are of the songs from my votes are only before 2000 1997, the latest of my votes. So I'm always here like rooting for the older songs, although no one has ever called me out like being a dinosaur or whatever in like a mean way. I just feel like it's probably because like I just don't really like talk to that many people about this. To be fair, I only sort of like express my love for old Eurovision entries to the people who also appreciate them.
I mean, I'm the same. If I think about what my daily listening is, I will listen to older entries on YouTube via Bluetooth to my car and things like that. So I admit I will spend far more time on older entries, partly because I think there's a brain capacity. I saw someone on Mastermind last year did the Eurovision Song Contest from 2011 to the present day, and I thought that was massively cheating. And until you realise that I can remember the winners and runners-up from 56 to 2003, and after that it's a real struggle for me. So I think there's a question of capacity as well from a purely sort of cognitive view.
That's interesting what you're saying there, Pete, because that kind of probably sort of stems back to quantifying what a fan is, because I'm going to be honest, if I was a Mastermind and it was Eurovision pre-2008, I'd be an absolute flop, like completely.
We need to form a quiz team.
yeah, exactly. But that's largely because I've always been very much, I would say, a casual watcher of it, and I found it increasingly more difficult at watching the noughties because it just got, just purely my opinion, it just got very, very silly, and that's something, and that always remains a contentious conversation on the fandom about what era was best and why people defend the noughties, and I always try to be nice, even though in my head I'm thinking, oh my god. But yeah, like you say, it's very much a case of what floats your boat. But I think also as well, I think because this is a bit, I'm kind of probably down a rabbit hole thinking this, but I think because the general production of music and technological advances, I think, has slowed. If you compare a period of, say, 1990 to 2000 compared to 2012 to 2022, you think advanced technology, it's moved a lot slower. And because Eurovision's often criticised for being a bit behind the times, maybe Eurovision has had the opportunity to kind of catch up. But I think also as well at the same time, it's become a lot more global. So I know quite a lot of people are not particularly into songs written by international songwriting camps. I think it's good to have some of those in because it shows there's an international investment, and having that international investment keeps things fresh. You can have eccentric and sort of more national sounding entries as well as having big international. They can both coexist, but sometimes fans think it's either one or the other, which sometimes gets a bit tedious sometimes.
I mean, the criticism this year was that, oh my God, there's a run of ballads in the middle of the final, and I was like, well, yeah, fine. So, like that. I mean, personally, I like a good ballad anyway, but there were people acting as though this was the end of days, that there wasn't enough sort of upbeat Europop going on this year. But I think, as you say, that I think the standard of production has gone up, and that means that the standard of writing has gone up, and that's because we have a diverse collection of writers, which is why we get, songs like Snap or Growing Up is Getting Old last year as these sorts of well-constructed but not typically Eurovision songs, and even Måneskin to that sort of to that example. This may be controversial now. We're going to talk about fan clubs now, in particular the OGAE. Is it right that members of fee-paying fan clubs get certain privileges, such as the potential to early access to tickets, compared to other fans who have to sit in their pajamas on a Tuesday morning with as many devices as possible trying to buy a ticket and being stuck in a queue of 10,000? Stunned silent.
I think it's also worth keeping in mind that they announced these kind of early ticket pre-sales before we had the Taylor Swift Ticketmaster complete collapse of everything, where whatever we feel about pre-sales, that's one thing, but the systems we have in place to actually kind of run them smoothly and somewhat fairly, that infrastructure doesn't seem to be quite in place, because I think it was like 4 million fans all at once open to the pre-sale when it was only meant to be a couple of thousands or something like that. And then they couldn't even open to a general sale because too many people had access to the pre-sale.
I mean, OGA, because obviously they had a huge spike in people joining the fan club immediately after the contest, and they have tried to tier who may get access to the ballot to try and stop people joining as a means of getting tickets. Now, again, there's a question of whether that's right or wrong. I suppose, to play devil's advocate to that, if we look at Wimbledon, for example, I think there's a few tennis fans in here as well who may be able to correct me on this, but your membership to the LTA is what determines your Wimbledon ticket. Is that right? Is that John? You know about this sort of thing, don't you?
Me? Or the other John?
I thought you both. I've seen you both.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an LTA member. But I mean, so I do know that people who are in the LTA do get preferred access to Wimbledon ticket sales for sure. I think there's the ballot that everyone like myself enters, that the chances of getting something are slim, and then there's a separate ballot for LTA members, which I think your chances are a lot better because obviously it's a smaller pool.
Perhaps in defence of OGAE, because I used to edit Vision magazine for a few years, but
it is very good.
Yeah. Oh no, it's fine. I've been a journalist all my working life. I'm used to criticism. Nobody needs to soft soap me. I understand why there's a process for ensuring that fans get first dibs on some tickets, because I know, for example, if you're a fan of, say, you're a massive footy fan and your team gets the FA Cup final, you can't always guarantee you'll get a ticket to the final, even though Wembley seats 90,000 people, because it's like corporate seating, corporate ticketing, etc. Yeah. A lot of tickets have to be to people who maybe necessarily aren't even interested in football. So I can understand why we want to get as many people who genuinely love this contest into the arena, so that their passion shines through. That atmosphere will then be palpable on screen. And I can understand why there's moves to make sure that as many genuine fans as possible. And one way to do that is to make ticketing available through the fan clubs. So I can understand why people do that process.
Yeah,
you've got to be patient. If you've only just joined OGAE, I can never work out what to call it. OGAE, I call it Oggy myself. But if you watch Sam Ryder come second, realise you loved Eurovision and join this year, you're not even going to be in the ballot for Liverpool, I don't think, unless they change things. But I've also seen from
September was the cut-off, I think.
Yeah, and I've also seen from the side of being on the committee how much hard work and how much stress goes into the ticketing side of it for the ticket secretary. It's not a fun job. I've seen them. It really isn't, and they get contacted all hours of the day from people because obviously, as you say, you're a fan, you're passionate. It's probably your own one realistic chance of securing a ticket. And it's going through the ballots through the fan club.
Yeah.
So, and that they do have a lot of people, taking up their free time because it's a voluntary job. They're fitting in around full-time jobs.
Yeah.
But I think you've got to think of that side of it as well.
And as someone who works nights a lot, and I've had emails from the president that have gone out at 2 a.m. in the morning. So yeah, it's a testament to the work that they do.
And I think it's also worth kind of keeping in mind that even though kind of my previous comment was less positive, that Eurovision is such an important community space for so many people in so many different configurations, and it's traditionally been regarded as a safe place to express different gender identities and different sexualities. So I think we have to acknowledge that and preserve that as kind of an important cultural space.
I just want to come back to, because we may develop that a little bit later on, Veronica, and it's a really good point. I just want to go back to what Jamie said about the ticket coordinators getting lots of emails, and you've said that it's about passion, that some of these people may email, when's the ballot, when's this, when's that. When does that enthusiasm turn into entitlement? I remember, I think it was last year or the year before last, one of the singers from Baccarat died, and the Eurovision Twitter account said, "We are sad to announce the death of I'm so sorry, I've forgotten her name, but we're sad to announce the death of one of the singers from Baccarat." And the first tweet underneath it was, "Yeah, whatever. When's the host city being announced?"
Oh, I remember that. Oh, that was just. I mean, I don't even know. I can't even find a word to describe how horrified I was when I saw that. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, horrific.
This is why I am wary about fans of recent Eurovision. Not only I'm not saying all of them, but some of them just don't have any regard for older contestants at all. I think it's just horrible. Fine, I understand if you don't like 1970s, but have some respect. That's really not a high baseline at all.
Are you saying then that if, for example, a 2016 contestant had suddenly died, that someone wouldn't have asked when the host city is going to be announced? Because I'm not sure. I think anyone could have died. It could have been Lissacia, it could have been Sam Ryder, and I think someone still would have gone, "Yeah, that's fine. When's the host city?"
I feel like it's still, if someone's really rude, it'll still happen. But I also feel like there's less people. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there's maybe people just don't care about old Eurovision as much as they do now. My probably second place, or even my personal winner of 2011, North Macedonia. So Vlatko passed away a few years ago as well. So it can happen to anyone, no matter how recent it is. But I also feel there's just less regard for older contestants in general. Maybe it's just from how I observe the fandom through Twitter and Facebook to an extent. But I just hope that this doesn't happen to anyone, regardless of when they took part of the contest.
I think also that the spaces we have cultivate certain roles. So if you look at some of the bigger pop cultural accounts on Twitter, it doesn't matter what they tweet. It can be against someone's passing or whatever else. And the first couple of comments will always be, "What about Cardi B? Where's Nicki's beef?" and things like that. So these are the less positive, dare I say, toxic cultures that we build in very small spaces, and kind of the echo chambers that they reinforce as well.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent example, obviously, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago, was when Sietse Bakker, the producer of the Dutch contest a couple of years back, said he was getting genuine abuse from people because of the voting system. and that was being implemented. And I think sometimes and we talked about it at length about the problems that we felt about it. But at no point in my life did I think I'm going to use that entitlement to send 240 characters of bile to a random TV producer in Holland. So I wonder what sometimes motivates people to sort of, is it such a strong desire that you have to get tickets for this once in a lifetime event that you will sort of behave in that manner, or is there something else to it?
I suppose you could argue that the more it's kind of built up as this, as you just said, amazing once in a lifetime event, the more likely you'll annoy people who don't get to go, if that makes sense. The more so obviously they have to build it up as attending being this wonderful thing, but then I suppose it gets to the point that those who miss out will actually feel more angry instead of just disappointed, because they're going to be feeling that they're missing out on something really, really amazing. If that makes sense.
I mean, I live half a mile from the arena, and if I'm not in that arena in May, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about things, and maybe that's me being slightly entitled even then to say, that I'm using my geographical location to entitle me to say, well, I should be there, or is it just that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that it's going to be so close to my house that if I'm not a part of it, it will never happen again, and that's a gutting experience. You can I think you can argue either way, can't you? I hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I suppose the more something is sold as this amazing once in a lifetime experience, anyone who misses out would feel more upset than. But obviously they obviously have to sell it as something that's once in a lifetime. They can't. They can't. Yeah, this thing's going to be on Liverpool. Yeah, come if you want. It might be all right. So that obviously wouldn't work either. Although maybe they should, because that would keep. That could be a good test of who's a real fan. If they go, yeah, we're going to do this thing in Liverpool. Might be a fun way to pass a night. Might not be. Come along and see. It would probably test who really is a fan or not.
I think just coming back to a point Jamie made about OGAE giving tickets out and wanting to make a good show and wanting fans who are enthusiastic and passionate to be there screaming their lungs out, which I think hopefully that's what we all want. And again, what I'm going to ask now comes back to the interactions between fans and maybe non-fans is, do we as fans try and gatekeep who's going to get into the contest? So put the OGAE ballot to one side and think just about the January ticket sale or whenever it's going to be. Again, I see things on Twitter where people say things such as, oh, my friend from school contacted me to ask me how I can get to Eurovision. Yeah, good luck with that. Now, do we as fans, and again, putting fan clubs entirely to one side, do we as fans try or want to gatekeep who comes in on the Saturday night?
I think there is an element. I've said a couple of things kind of jokingly, like obviously being held in Liverpool and thinking, it's not this because it's like, hang on a minute, you're only a casual watcher, you're not going kind of thing. But I obviously sort of saying that in like a jokey kind of way, of course. But because at the end of the day, there could be these people out there who, like, I've been to 7, for example. So for me, I absolutely loved the experience, but that for my first ever time of going, it will never quite match that. But I think for someone who could go there for the first time and be absolutely blown away, and that feeling and that exhilaration, the experience, at the same time, you wouldn't want to malign their chances of getting a ticket at the same time. I just think it's a case of, I can't think of an example, but it could be something I might fancy going to as a one-off, which I don't consider myself to be a massive fan of. I'm not thinking about diehard fans who might be able to get tickets as a consequence of someone more casual. I don't really believe there should be a hierarchy, generally speaking.
In a funny sort of way, I'm in a similar position to Pete. I live about half an hour's walk from the arena, so I'm made up. Eurovision's
I live close to Jamie. I deserve it.
I'm gonna get the tape measure out. But funnily enough, Eurovision coming to Liverpool has sort of made me realise that even if I don't get a ticket, I shouldn't get too upset, because there's people who are asking, people showing a genuine passion for this event in my home city, who I would never have expected to show an interest in it. But I thought, well, isn't it better that they show an interest and maybe suddenly spark a love for Eurovision from it coming to Liverpool? And if they get to see it, all power to them. I think it's great. And if I have to maybe go to the Saturday afternoon family show or the Friday night jury show, then so be it. To me, I just think it's great, and it's in my home city. I never dreamed in a million years it would come to Liverpool, and I'm still buzzing about it. And you know, and I wouldn't begrudge anybody. I don't want to become like Eric Cantona talking about suits eating prawn bonbons in the corporate box. I don't want to start sounding bitter like that. I just think, you know what, and if because of this you stop thinking of Eurovision as this camp kitsch cheesy event and see it for the event that it really is, then good luck to you.
I totally agree with that, Jamie. I think, like you say, there's people who want to go, and that may not have done even as recent as 12 months ago. So surely the more people into it, generally the better. It's not our contest. Sometimes fans give it too carried away themselves, thinking they think too much about their own self-interest, and they forget at the end of the day, it's a TV show. Bear with me, let me try and get into the room. At the end of the day, it's the show isn't for 0.01% of the viewing population, i.e. the hardcore fans. It is for the 99.9% of casual viewers who want to have really, really good entertainment. And it's only once a year, and want to make it as opulent and as special as they can. So that's the upshot. I think sometimes we do lose sight of that a little bit.
And that's a question we've asked in the last couple of weeks in these discussions, is when we talked about orchestras, when we've talked about voting systems, it always comes back to the fundamental point of, does the casual viewer care? And actually, you know, and they're probably not that interested whether there's an orchestra or not. They're probably not that interested on the voting mechanics. And you're right that they just want to watch a Saturday evening entertainment show that has a real longevity to it. And because there's now an opportunity for them to come and see it, they should be encouraged to do that. I would say, and maybe Veronica as a sort of, and Simeon as music academics may know more about this than me, but you see anecdotally a sort of similar thing with Glastonbury, where, oh, well, they got tickets for Glastonbury, but I know far more about music than them. Oh, they don't even like music. Oh, well, I can't believe they got to go to Glastonbury. How come I didn't get to go to Glastonbury? And I think that, you know, ultimately, because people go to Glastonbury because it's 5 outstanding days in the field, and everyone should experience that. And I think, again, you know, sort of members of the public experiencing Eurovision or experiencing the whole atmosphere or the Euro Village is something that should be encouraged.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way because, like, one of my colleagues said she's going to Liverpool next year, or at least she plans to, and I won't, but I'm obviously more of like a bigger Eurovision fan than her, because like she probably doesn't know about like Yugoslavia 1967, for example, but I'm just happy for her that she's going. Like, enjoy the evening. I won't be there. I'll watch it from home. But like, you enjoy the evening. Tell me how it goes. Vote for your favorite song. Fangirl the favorite song all you want, because you know. I just want people to enjoy themselves. Like, you don't have to love my old boomer years with me, but if you want to go to Eurovision 2023, by all means go. I would enjoy 1970 more, but 1970 or 2023, they're all Eurovision, so enjoy it, whatever it is.
So Simeon once again is being incredibly polite with his hand up, I think, and I missed it. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I think I've changed what I was going to say. I don't know. You raised the interesting point about you know, that this type of like fan gatekeeping happens everywhere, and it does create like a real sense of fear sometimes of like, oh, am I allowed to, you know, like something because I don't know enough about it. I haven't read everything. I don't know about every single contest. You know, like as a trombonist, sometimes I fear meeting other trombonists, especially in like jazz settings, because they'll just like name loads of trombone players that I should know, but I don't know. I don't really care that much about, but I do love the trombone, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And it's that weird kind of thing, like fear of meeting like other Eurovision fans sometimes. Am I legitimate enough? I think I have, you know, I live, I think, about a 12-minute walk maybe from the stadium, not to try and outdo anyone on this call. And I think I've resigned myself to I'm probably not going to get tickets for the final. And I don't know if I'm that bothered by it. I think maybe the final's a bit passé. Maybe all the real fans go to the matinee performance, you know, or go to the pre-record or whatever, or the jury.
The real fans go to the Philharmonic the night before.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it is. I always come back to this point of like, it is a TV show that should be experienced on TV. If you do get to experience it live, that's ace. And I do want to experience some of it live. But I think when it actually comes to the actual final, I kind of want to be playing a drinking game with some friends, or maybe in the village or something. Do you know what I mean? I think I need to experience it as a TV show.
In Lisbon, I think I managed to do every experience. I did the semi-final 1 from home, and then I flew out on the Wednesday, did semi-final 2 in the Eurovillage, and got bear hugged by a load of Danish Vikings when they qualified, and got a bit drunk. And then I went to the final itself.
And that's where we left part 1. In part 2, we'll talk about fans as judges, fans getting press accreditation, and some fans share their experiences both positive and negative. See you soon.